the breaking news of the day. First of all, everything is breaking on Fox News. I don't understand. They keep using that word. I do not think it means what they think it means. Breaking. Israel approves plan to capture all of Gaza. I'm going to get hate from everybody, from the Zionists, from my friends and family. Viva, you've got to unconditionally support everything Israel does, because if they go, then so do you. And they may be right, but it doesn't mean I'm going to suspend disbelief and compromise critical thought. From day one after October 7, when the world was in shock, all that I wanted to know was how. And we are now, I don't know, going to be 2 years later. We still don't know how. I had Gadi Taub on, Israeli journalist, historian, very smart guy. And when I asked Gadi, I unabashedly and without shame or embarrassment, floated conspiracy theories, so-called conspiracy theories. Some people believe 9/11 was a lehop, let it happen on purpose, or a made it happen on purpose. A horrible, destructive attack is imminent. You don't know how horrible, how destructive, but it's imminent. And out of the ashes of the World Trade Centers, you got the Patriot Act, and you got the world in which we live, constant surveillance, bad for the people, good for the government. And Building 7 destroyed despite everything not having hit it. And what was in that building, we talked about that last week. From day one, how the hell could this have happened at such a scale for such a duration of time, given Israel's, border that can detect a squirrel, Iron Dome that can pick off missiles, human intelligence second to none? How the hell did it happen? How the hell did it go on for so long before Israeli intervention? And don't you think those questions need to be answered before the very same administration that was at the helm of this catastrophic failure decides the reprisal response? And I got called names, lots of them. And okay, that doesn't mean the question is wrong, and that's not an answer. From day one, I said people are going to view this, if you want to be conspiratorial, as a lehop mehop, so that it can justify expansion into the occupied territories. And then people said to me, and Gadi Taub said the same thing, anybody who thinks that any government, or the Israeli government in particular, would allow such an atrocity to happen so they could expand their borders is grotesque. You don't have to agree with something in order to steelman the argument. The steelman retort to that is governments are grotesque. Governments have done the most grotesque things throughout the history of government. All governments are relatively grotesque, and to assume that one government is somehow less grotesque than other governments is a bit naive. Is it not grotesque that the American government tested on Black Americans in the Tuskegee experiments for decades, either giving them syphilis or not treating their syphilis? Is that not grotesque? Is it not grotesque that the Japanese government was performing vivisections on Chinese soldiers? Was the rape of Nanking not grotesque? Residential schools in Canada, was that not grotesque? Mass human experimentation that was the COVID jab on the populations of the world, was that not grotesque? So grotesque as it might be is not an answer for impossibility. It would be grotesque if a government allowed or facilitated or didn't intervene when it could have, when it had good intelligence that planes or terrorists were about to fly planes into the World Trade Centers and kill thousands of people. It would be grotesque. That's not a response, especially given how grotesque governments have been throughout their history. So when I asked Gadi Taub, and I said, what about the conspiracy theory that the right, Netanyahu, whether or not they knew it would be this horrific, says, we know that we have infrastructure weaknesses. We know that we've got political turmoil in the country. We know we've got people resigning from their posts. We know that we have a security weakness because we were on a 60 Minutes interview 3 weeks before the October 7 attacks. And the questioner, I think it was Leslie Stahl, was saying, you have weaknesses at the border because of the political turmoil. What happens? To which one of the answers was, what is the price of democracy? Like, do we have to negotiate with the people who are walking off their security positions out of political protest? And he says, what is the cost of democracy? Do they get to tell us what we can do? That was his response to the 60 Minutes question that you have security issues right now because of your political turmoil.
The fight over the court has brought the country to a cold civil war. In July, the first step of Levine's judicial overhaul passed, severely limiting the court's power to strike down government decisions. Some 10,000 military reservists were so upset, they pledged to stop showing up for duty. When they made their decision, many brothers and sisters in arms came to tears.
It was the hardest things to do. When you are in your DNA, a soldier, this is what I do 25 years. It's in my blood. It's like to cut a hand.
The military has warned that losing so many pilots and high-ranking reservists could jeopardize readiness and hurt national security. But several former heads of the military and Mossad support the protest and blame the government for allowing the situation to come to this. If you did find out that Israel was at risk because of so many reservists leaving, would you step back and withdraw your proposals?
What's the price of democracy? What are you suggesting me to do? We'll tell the Israeli citizens, okay, don't go to vote. There's no need to hold elections. We'll come to those ex-militarists and we'll ask them what we are allowed to do or not.
They knew there were security issues 3 weeks before the attack. The attack happens. Inexplicable, inexcusable. The attack lasts for hours. Inexplicable, inexcusable. And when I asked Gadi Taub, how could it have gone on for 12 up to 24 hours, according to some reports, before Israeli intelligence or military intervened? And he says, honestly, I don't have a good answer. All right, but that's going to be the government that's going to determine the appropriate response after its most cataclysmic failure. And so some people said, it could be a right-wing lee-hop, me-hop to justify further expansion into occupied territories. Gadi Taub floated a very interesting theory that I didn't really fully consider. It could have been an anti-Netanyahu. On the conservative side, some people say this was the equivalent of Trump derangement syndrome on steroids. People hate Netanyahu so much that some on the right posit that Mossad, which hates Netanyahu, turned a blind eye, so that this would happen, so that they could then blame it on Netanyahu and oust him from power. So everybody entertains to some extent some of these alternative theories, and offensive and grotesque as they may be, that's not a response. That is a long-winded intro into what I wanted to show first, which was this is the breaking news of the day according to Fox News. Israel approves plan to capture all of Gaza. I'm sure it'll be temporary, and afterwards the land will be returned to the Palestinians. It won't. And I'll say this is neutral analysis, not fence-sitting analysis. I can steelman both sides of this equation. On the one side, you're going to have that what's her name? Kyle Kalinski's wife. What's her name? Crystal Ball. You'll have the crystal balls of the world saying this is grotesque. This was the plan all along. This is inhumane. They starve them out. They bomb them out. They kill innocent civilians. And now they're not going to give back the territory. They're going to expand either Israeli territory or a buffer zone. Those Palestinians that have been displaced are never going to go back. This is genocide under the definition of 1940, whatever, which seems to include displacement. They'll say it's genocide. The flip side, steelman argument, and we can take the Ben Shapiros of the world, are going to say this is what happens when terrorists hide among civilians. There is no alternative but to create a buffer zone, because when you give them the land and you withdraw, all that they end up doing is using the cement you're giving them to build schools, to build tunnels. They end up stripping whatever resources you give them to create bombs, etc. They hide among civilians specifically so that civilian casualties are high. This is the only way to eradicate Hamas. We're going to go in, displace them, kill every last one of Hamas, and create a demilitarized zone so that Israel can live in peace, because quite clearly you can't have contiguous borders because things like October 7 happen. Those are the two steelman arguments. You pick whichever one you think is more logical, more reasonable. That is the long-winded intro to the breaking news.
And Israel approving a plan to capture all of Gaza. The Associated Press says the IDF is tapping tens of thousands of reserves in order to do so. Meanwhile, the Jewish state is promising a stern response to yesterday's missile attack from Yemen on the port near Tel Aviv. General Jack Keane is with us now, and we were just talking in the break, how there's always something going on in the world. But in this part of the world, Israel continues to fight on multiple fronts. They still have hostages that they're trying to deal with. Capturing Gaza in the midst of all of this with the Houthis attacking their airport. How do you see it, sir?
By the way, not for nothing, this is on the eve of Trump talking about negotiations, sitting down to talk with Iran. Talked about it last night, and I can steelman both sides of this ideological debate. The only question is people want to know personally where I stand on this so that they can either love me or hate me. And the reality is I have always been conflicted on this. Some might say naively say two-state solution, and if you can't have a mutual two-state solution, you can have an imposed two-state solution. Build a freaking wall and leave their territory to them. Then people are going to say, well, they don't have natural resources, they don't have an economy, you can't do that, it's not plausible, so you have to let them come in and work so they can bring money back to their families, and they can. It's a conundrum, but to be noted that this is occurring the day after, 2 days after, The breaking news is that this occurs 2 days after Trump says we're going to sit down and talk with Iran, and people lambasting Trump for saying, how dare he even sit down to negotiate, not even to negotiate, to talk without, before even sitting down to talk, setting certain conditions. I'm not playing the whole thing, so don't worry, but I'll just play a few more seconds.
Yeah, well, what's really taking place here, certainly, is General Zamir came in on March the 5th, and he presented a new plan to the prime minister. Credit the previous chief of the Israeli Defense Forces for killing, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3, 75% of the Hamas fighters. But there's still several thousand left. And they did that in the past by conducting raids and then moving on to another area where there are Hamas fighters. General Zamir's plan is to take territory and then kill the Hamas or capture them in that territory and depose them from any future ability to have political control of Gaza. That's the end state. They recognize full well if they're not able to do that, it'd be impossible for them to leave Gaza and turn it over to some international force that would be willing to provide security for a new Palestinian-like government. All of that obviously is still circumspect and no decisions have been made. But from a military perspective, what is happening here is to finish off Hamas once and for all, so they cannot have any political ability to control Gaza in the future.
Well, just put on pause and we'll stop. And who fills in for Hamas? It'll be one terrorist group after another that will take control of the occupied territories. PLO, Hamas. It's been going on forever, by the way. This happened in 2001, and I remember it. And it's the same cycle over and over again. More people saying this was the plan all along. Other people saying this had to be done all along. It's something along the lines of the celebration parallax, although I think that's not the right term for it anymore. The paradox parallax. It's not happening, but it's necessary to be done because there's no other solution. And if you had said it from the beginning, well, then you would have lost public support, as if you ever had public support for this from day one in any event. It's an old proverb. It's actually an old Jewish proverb. Two people are fighting in a town. They go to the village elder or the village rabbi, and they say, one guy tells the rabbi the story and says what's going on, why they're fighting. And the rabbi says to the guy, you're right. And then, but the other guy says, well, tells his side of the story. He says, this is why we're fighting. And then the rabbi says to him, well, you're right also. And then a third person comes in and says, well, they both can't be right. And the rabbi says, well, you're right also. And that is the story of what's coming out of the Middle East.